our final speaker on this panel will be Ms. Sun Yun.
Thank you, Professor Sikkings, for kind of introduction and for SPF USA for the invitation to be here today. I was asked to discuss China's aid policy toward Myanmar and how China views the American and Japanese aids in the country. So I'll dive directly into the issue. Historically, Chinese aid have played an important role in Myanmar's national economy and in its development. And this perception is particularly strong inside China, especially during the 2 decades between 1990 and 2011, when Myanmar was under severe international isolation and Western sanctions. China was one of the few available donor countries to Myanmar when the other countries kept their doors closed. Chinese aids to Myanmar have a few key features. First of all, Chinese aids have been rather diverse and comprehensive. For example, Chinese government industrial aids, mostly in the form of built factories, historically has helped the country to support some basic industrial basis functions while it was under the international sanction. Such fields mainly cover textile, medicine, home appliances, and porcelain industries, which have been dependent quite heavily on Chinese capital and Chinese technologies. On the Chinese development aids to Myanmar, these have mostly focused on building infrastructure projects inside the country. And some examples would include landmark buildings such as the International Convention Center in Naypyidaw, and as well as hydropower projects such as the Panglong hydropower station built about 10 years ago. China has also provided humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. Examples include the Chinese donations in 2008 after the Cyclone Nargis, and in 2013 when China provided donations and humanitarian assistance to Kachin refugees affected in the Kachin conflict. Last but not least, of course, there's military aids. China provides military aids to Tatmadaw, mostly in the formats of military training, military equipments, some arms sales, and meal-to-meal exchanges. The second feature of Chinese aid to Myanmar lies in the fact that China is not an OECD country and does not follow the OECD definition of foreign aid. Therefore, China's economic aids to Myanmar have served multiple purposes historically and are not at all altruistic. During the military government, from the Chinese perspective, economic aids were not only an economic instrument to boost Myanmar's economic growth or sustain its development, but also served a political goal, which China saw as a political utility of development aids to help to strengthen the legitimacy of the military government and to improve its domestic stability. China has also had its own economic incentives in providing those aids that are linked to often linked to China's own economic benefits. For example, the financing of Chinese hydropower projects inside Myanmar oftentimes encompasses different components, and free grants usually make a very tiny percentage of the whole package. Even for concessional loans, only the differences between the Chinese concessional interest rates and the market commercial interest rate is covered by the Chinese foreign aid budget. So furthermore, China in most cases treats these projects as tied aids, meaning that the procurement process will have to favor Chinese products, service contracts, especially construction companies. The third feature of Chinese aid to Myanmar is that in the past, most of the aids from China were negotiated, delivered, and implemented between the two governments. And Beijing rarely reached out directly to the Myanmar civil society or the people. This was also determined by the nature of Chinese aids. For example, before 2012, China claimed it has provided 30 package deals, including infrastructures, and factories. But these package deals to Myanmar were not targeted at immediate improvement of the livelihood of the Burmese people. After the downturn of the Sino-Burmese relationship since 2011, the Chinese foreign policy apparatus and the policy community have argued that this lack of contact with the Burmese people is a main deficiency of China's aid policy or China's broader foreign policy toward Myanmar. China since then has tried to address this deficiency. However, in this process, another problem emerged, which is many of the Chinese corporate social responsibility projects got mixed up with Chinese aid projects. And the Chinese reports and analysis began to categorize the infrastructure projects built by Chinese companies, such as roads, schools, hospitals, and local donations, as Chinese aid. One example is CNPC's corporate social responsibility projects along its oil and gas pipeline inside Myanmar. These are widely reported by the company itself and by the Chinese media as Chinese aid projects. However, these projects are not funded or managed by the Ministry of Commerce, therefore should not be categorized as aid per se. About China's attitude towards American and Japanese aid toward Myanmar, China has a rather naturally hostile and almost zero-sum perception about American and Japanese engagements inside the country, and aids are no exception to this scheme of thought. Although the concerns towards the American and Japanese aids manifest themselves in different ways inside China. This is probably because in the Chinese perception, the American aids to Myanmar so far have mostly focused on political issues, while the Japanese aids are mostly economically oriented. Then from Beijing's perspective, American aids, such as those on civil society, political parties, elections, and ethnic reconciliation, mostly serve the purpose of democratization. While China does not oppose the democratization of Myanmar, the Chinese have had a difficult time seeing the Myanmar's democratic reform as conducive to China's national interests, given what has happened between the two countries since the beginning of the political reform. This view is strengthened by an almost compulsory tendency among Chinese analysts to see what happened in Myanmar as planned, instigated, and facilitated by the United States all along. Therefore, this Chinese perception about American aids to Myanmar is further intensified, further inflated by a strong sense of uncertainty, because the Chinese do not quite see or quite know what else the American democratization efforts will unleash inside the country and how they will further affect China's national interests. Japanese aids to Myanmar represent a different set of challenges to China. China frames Japan's active economic diplomacy in Southeast Asia, including in Myanmar, in a broader framework of Japanese attempt to compete and undermine China's perceived regional leadership and its influence in the region. Under the broader context of deterioration of Sino-Japanese relations under the Abe and Xi administrations, a sense of strategic competition through economic engagements, including aids programs from Japan, is particularly popular in China. In fact, both Burmese and Chinese observers seem to hold the view that since 2013, Japanese ODA has had a negative effect over Chinese economic activities in Myanmar. Using the aborted Sino-Myanmar railway project from Kunming to Kyupyo as an example, Myanmar officials have cited the better terms and the lower interest rates of the Japanese ODA compared to the Chinese commercial loans as a key reason to abandon the original plan to work with China for the railway, although the negotiation seems to be still ongoing for a different set of arrangements. As for donor coordination or aid cooperation between China and the United States as well as Japan, at the current stage, such possibility seems to be extremely low. In 2013, State Department and the Chinese Foreign Ministry had discussed the possibility to coordinate with Myanmar counterparts on an appropriate project, such as in the field of health, to work together for Myanmar's stability and development. Nevertheless, despite the excitement and people's high hopes, in the past 2 years, we have seen little or no signs of concrete examples of such cooperation. Although China and the United States share common interests in Myanmar's stability and economic development, their diverging interests coming to the perceived strategic competition in Myanmar inevitably affects the potential and scope for such cooperation. In addition, both countries agreed that Myanmar should play a pivotal role in such U.S.-China cooperation in their country, so that such plans will not be perceived as a great powers agreement to distribute issues or distribute sphere of influence inside Myanmar. However, whether Myanmar government is willing or capable of playing such a role remains to be seen. As for Sino-Japanese cooperation or coordination in Myanmar, given the improvement of Sino-Japanese relations this year is still at the nascent stage, such discussion remains to be seen as well. Thank you.